All right, everyone, we're back on Morning Line on this Monday. Our guest, Davidson County Sheriff Daron Hall. It's always good to have him on and taking your phone calls if you want, 737-7587. More to get to in a moment, but Joe's other question was an update on the jail, and you during the break were telling me about an interesting tie-in when it comes to, keeping plans confidential, because we think in Mexico somehow, that drug lord got hold of the plans to have them tunnel him out. Talk a bit about that. The status, by the way, we now know that you're going to refurbish the old jail instead of building a new one. That's the way it's worked out. Got a new mayor coming in. We'll see how it all plays. But where are we on that, and what were you going to tell me about the plans? Yeah,
Joe had mentioned about where are we on the fiasco. As he described it, I agree with him on that. That with the future of the facilities, we are, as you know, right across the street here, one of our larger facilities. The council funded, I think, $113 million to retrofit or renovate the downtown campus. So we're going to spend the money downtown. It's not the most efficient way of doing it. It's not probably the best location to do it, but that's where we're going to do it. The council has spoken, and we're going to do it that way. But in that process, one of the things I found interesting was in the process of the move, we had some city council members, maybe even some public at large, that were conspiracy theorists about why we weren't going to release the actual drawings, the plans of the new facility. It had nothing to do with the contract, which is a public right, obviously. But the public doesn't have a right to know where the shower holes are going to be and where the walls are going to be and where the doors are going to be and how they're going to be locked, because whether it's El Chapo or some local situation here, that information is not public record. We wouldn't give it to the media or the public. And
you're talking about the plans, the design for the new jail. That stuff's confidential. It's
right.
classified.
It would show you exactly where the plumbing chases are going to be. It'd show you exactly where the doors are going to be. And so there was some controversy at I think some city council members, a few in particular, wanted to make that an issue, which really was ridiculous. The point is that's not a public record because the public wouldn't want people like El Chapo or others knowing how to get people out of jails. That's a security issue, as you can imagine. So, but there was controversy about it at some point. It got a little bit lost in the translation of what was going on. But it is important. It's important for us. I mean, I remember, you'll love this story, but it's probably 15, 16 years ago, Thanksgiving night, I was out with my mother at midnight. She wanted to go shopping somewhere, so I was taking her to, they opened the doors at the wee hours of the morning, and while we're standing there, we had 2 escapes, and or an escape with 2 people. And so I leave her, I think, at the shopping center and drove down here, and come to find out, long story short, that we had a couple folks that punched a hole out of the wall, went out of the roof, and when you figured it out, they were literally landing on a pad out of a hole they had punched and landed, or they would have fallen 6 or 7 stories into the streets. And but when you dig your way back and you figure everything out and you get them caught back and brought back in, you sit down and talk to them.
How did they get down from the pad, by the way?
Yeah, there was the pad was below the hole enough where they could hang on the hole and land on the pad, and a car drove by, they jumped in the car and left.
Gotcha. Okay.
But you and I wouldn't have been able to do that. And so when you ask them, how in the world did you do it, and how'd you know that pad, which was not big enough for anyone else to know to be there, they were on the construction company that built the jail.
They knew. Amazing.
Yeah, one of the 2 guys.
Amazing. And then they hung and then just fell down to the car.
The pad, the car, truck is what it was, and so they jumped in the bed of a truck at 2 in the morning, and so it was.
Okay, well that knowledge made the someone else wouldn't have known that.
They were one of the 2 guys was on the
well, point taken. Why those remain confidential.
Right.
All right, let's go to Taylor. Taylor, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Hey,
Sheriff. I'd like to repeat or concur in what Paul had to say.
Thank you.
I want to change the subject just a bit, if I might, still concerning jail and your prisoners. I heard an official of the Immigration Service talk recently of mentioning the program, I think this number's right, the 287 program that our county implemented for a certain period of time, and then that was dropped, and that, I think you know what I'm talking about, on the information and so forth, when an illegal immigrant was picked up for some reason or another. Between that and the verdict or award that came out of the lady that was arrested over in Berry Hill, I heard hardly anything anymore out of our county concerning those type of arrests or problems. My question is this: it is virtually impossible to get information out of the Immigration Service on numbers of what is going on within that community. Now, I don't know if they have the numbers and just refuse to release it or whatnot. But my question is, are there a lot of forms that you fill out when you have a illegal or thoughtful illegal in custody that goes to the Immigration Service? Is there a lot of information that's provided to them that you feel is sufficient and so forth? And does our city have any regulations that prevent you from doing things like a sanctuary city? Not that we are one, but I've heard we're a semi-sanctuary city. So if you can address any of the points you feel comfortable in doing so, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, Taylor. Okay, so here's, unfortunately, I have a lot of experience in those 6 or 7 years
How long
of this
has it
situation.
been? 287G's been gone.
We've been out 3 years probably or more. We were in it for 5, so I mean it was a pretty extensive time period. But yeah, here's the thing, Taylor. You need to remember. The thing that the public would be frustrated about is that if Nick Beres was in the country illegally today and he was arrested last night for DUI or for robbing a bank for that matter, the fact that when you came in illegally, but you're not known by the immigration system. Okay. You came in the wee hours of the morning,
no one knows I'm here.
Or whatever. Right, no one knows. So you've been arrested. Okay. So the immigration system doesn't know that you're illegally in the country, nor would we without 287G. 287G allowed us to force you to tell us and prove that you're in the country legally. That's really what it was. Every arrestee, we would say, we need to know that you're legally in this country, and you have to produce the documents to
So you can't ask that anymore?
No.
You can't ask it anymore.
So the only people you're going to know about in any immigration system's data now are the people that they know via been caught at the border or arrested previously and have their fingerprints as an illegal immigrant.
So what happens then to an illegal that is arrested for robbing a bank and no one knows he's not in the system? You get him in there. You're not allowed to ask him then, right, about his citizenship. So you book him as you would anyone just for that robbery, but he would not be passed to immigration?
I probably misspoke. Let me say, on an aggravated felony, which is probably not a bank robbery is close because it's a federal offense too, but let me get down. Let's say a robbery or an assault in a bar or a DUI, and none of that would ever reach the immigration system. They're not going to come and interview and make sure to determine if you're legally in the country.
So you book them and they serve their time for that crime or whatever if they're convicted, and then they released back into the...
Right. And that's the flaw without a 287G system if you want to know who's illegal in the country. Now, if you've ever been in the country, he mentioned the woman who was pregnant and so forth. What was unique about that case that people lost sight of was that she was driving without a license, and I think there was a couple other charges that she was arrested for. That's what brought her to jail. But what people lost sight of was she was also deported twice. If you've ever been deported and you enter the country again, that is a new federal crime. The first time you come in the country, it's a civil violation because you didn't know you couldn't do it. If we remove you from the country and you come back, you're clearly...
You know by then.
You know. Right. So she came back in the country, was illegally in the country, having been deported twice. Or I believe once, I forget. And she'd been arrested this time, and so those two things are what made her a federal inmate. It wasn't the driving, I forget exactly what her charges were. But so what Taylor's question is, which is very good, is that if Daron and Nick are both illegally in the country, Daron had his fingerprints in the immigration system 10 years ago for having been arrested in Texas and removed. Then when I get the DUI tonight, they're going to fingerprint me. They know I'm illegally in the country, but the federal government's not going to remove me anymore either, but they do know I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, in Nick Beres' case, you snuck in the country, have never had your fingerprints in the immigration system, and you have a fight in a bar, you stab someone. That is not going to get you removed nor identified by the federal government because they don't know who you are.
So you don't turn over inmates anymore to immigration?
Except those whose fingerprints hit and that they tell us they want us to send.
Okay, but they don't tell you that on every single one of them?
No. None of the Nick Beres examples would be that way. But the Daron who was in the system, they know who I am, I've been removed before, and now I've had 2 DUIs and so forth. They can tell us to
And if you would, what was, as I recall, we all did stories on it, and I covered 287. What was it that concluded it? I know that Nashville Metro was one of several cities, and it wasn't widespread, that was, you know, kind of a trial with this.
Right.
It ended, not because of anything you guys did wrong. It's ended, I don't think, is it any place else in existence anymore?
Yeah, they're still doing it in a handful of cities. We were under a contract, and you could renew the contract or not, and so we chose not to renew it for 2 reasons. One was the administration in Washington was changing its kind of view of immigration at the time, and so they were softening the rules about many things in immigration, and so it was very difficult to believe that you could long-term, you know, continue this. Second part of it was our numbers had dropped dramatically. We'd done, I thought, a very good job of dealing with what we were talking about, an arrested person who was illegal in the country and removing them. Our numbers had gone, I believe, from like 12% of our arrest population down to 3 or 4%. It was really dramatic, the shift. So we were paying staff to do it. It worked, and we had 5 or 6 staff, or 12 staff total, but per shift dedicated to that, and the volume wasn't there anymore for us to continue. And so if the federal government was going to weaken some of its stance, and we were paying people to do what is, I thought, had been very successful, we were going to get out of that business and move on to something else. And so now we're years later, and you're hearing the conversation. The man who killed the woman in San Francisco had been held and removed several times, and I think it's a sanctuary city, which basically means they're not going to remove you. The sheriff, I believe, released the person because the federal government wasn't going to. There's a conflict over who should have been doing it. But Taylor's right on. I mean, the issue is he will not get very good data because they're not interviewing people like Nick Beres anymore.
From you, as we go to the break, Taylor, I'm sure, is sitting there right now, has the one question I wanted to ask you. Since 287G's been away, and you said you saw dramatic improvement, do you think, just based on your anecdotal evidence, the numbers are creeping back up?
I think the numbers of people who are illegally in the country and committing crimes are going back up. I don't think it's a wave. I think that's definitely going to go back up. But the problem is, if the stance in this country is to not want to remove people that are in the country illegally, then you're really picking up sand with a fork. You're just shoveling things that really, whatever it is, paperwork, and it really doesn't make any sense. And I think that the country wanted to do something about it. I always get interested in the national conversation about removing 12 million or 30 million or whatever the number is. I was never interested in that. I wanted to remove the people who were committing crimes and illegally in the country. That was a very small portion, but now even that has, I think, been weakened dramatically. So, you know, the federal government has a job to do, the local government has a job to do. We were partnering to do their job for them, but ultimately, if the federal government doesn't want to remove people, why are we doing all that work?
All right, on that note, we'll take a break. When we come back, Donna, we'll get to your phone calls and others. If you're on hold, questions, comments for the sheriff right after this. Yes, you guys brought